Colorado Territory, 1879. A bitter spring wind raked across the plains, pushing dark clouds westward as Violet Harper stood at the front of the church in Sterling Creek, her trembling hands clutching a newborn girl swaddled in a hand-stitched blanket. The babe was just 2 weeks old, her small face peaceful in sleep despite the chaos unfolding around her. The wooden pews behind Violet sat empty now, the wedding guests having filed out in awkward silence after it became clear that Thomas Weatherby, her fiancé and the father of her child, was not coming. At 23, Violet had believed that love could conquer all, even in the unforgiving West. Her golden blonde hair, neatly pinned beneath a simple wedding bonnet adorned with sprigs of dried lavender, now felt heavy as the minutes ticked by. Her cream-colored dress, sewn by hand over the difficult months of her pregnancy, now seemed to mock her naivety. "Miss Harper," the minister said gently, his weathered face creased with concern. "Perhaps we should," he promised, Violet whispered, her blue eyes fixed on the church doors. He promised he would be here. The frontier had taught her many lessons in resilience since her family had settled in Colorado 5 years prior. She'd learned to make do with little, to weather storms both literal and figurative. But nothing had prepared her for this moment. Abandoned at the altar with her infant daughter, facing the judgment of an entire town. The false belief that had sustained her through the difficult birth and the whispers behind her back now crumbled. The belief that a woman needed a man to survive in this harsh territory, that marriage was the only path to security and respectability. As she stood alone in that church, rocking her daughter, she began to understand that perhaps she had been mistaken all along. Perhaps the West was no place for romantic notions of love and family. Perhaps it was simply a place of harsh realities where women like her were left to fend for themselves. "I should have known better," she whispered to her sleeping child. "This land doesn't reward those who hope too much." The church doors swung open, and for a heartbeat, Violet's hopes soared, until she saw it was only the wind. Beyond the threshold lay the dusty main street of Sterling Creek, a town that would surely now view her as nothing more than a fallen woman. A woman with no husband, no prospects, and a child born out of wedlock. The baby stirred in her arms, tiny fingers reaching from the blanket. Violet pressed her lips to her daughter's forehead, inhaling the sweet scent that somehow made the pain bearable. "It's just you and me now, Emma," she whispered. "Miss Harper," the minister tried again. "Perhaps you should return to your father's home. The weather is turning, and my father made it clear that if Thomas didn't marry me, I wouldn't be welcome back," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "He believes I've brought shame to the family name." As if to emphasize the precariousness of her situation, thunder rumbled in the distance. The storm that had been threatening all morning was drawing closer, much like the uncertainty that now loomed over Violet's future. The doors of the church creaked open once more, but this time it wasn't the wind. A tall figure stood silhouetted against the gray sky, broad-shouldered, hat in hand. It wasn't Thomas. This man was taller, his silhouette more imposing, yet somehow less threatening. He stepped into the church, boots echoing on the wooden floor. Adam Xavier, 26 years old and owner of the Silverhorn Ranch 10 miles outside of town, was known throughout the county as a man of few words. His clean-shaven face was tanned from long days working under the Colorado sun, his eyes a deep brown that seemed to take in everything without giving away his thoughts. Despite his youth, he had built his ranch into one of the most prosperous in the territory through sheer determination and hard work. "Miss Harper," he said simply, nodding in acknowledgement. His voice was deep but gentle, like distant thunder without the threat. Violet had met Adam only a handful of times at town gatherings, and once when she'd accompanied her father to purchase a horse from his ranch. He was respected but not well known, a man who kept to himself and his work. "Mr. Xavier," she replied, struggling to maintain her composure. "The ceremony has been postponed." Adam's eyes moved to the bundle in her arms, then back to her face. There was no judgment in his gaze, only a quiet understanding that made her chest tighten. "I heard," he said. "Thomas Weatherby took the morning stage to Denver." The words landed like physical blows. Not only had Thomas abandoned her, but he had fled entirely, left the territory without so much as a note of explanation. "I see," Violet said, though her vision blurred with tears she refused to shed. Storm's coming, Adam continued, glancing toward the windows where dark clouds were gathering. Do you have somewhere to go? The question hung in the air, simple yet devastating in its implication. No, she did not. Her father had closed his door to her. Thomas was gone, and the modest room she'd been renting in town had been given up in anticipation of moving into Thomas's home after the wedding. Before she could formulate a response that preserved what little dignity she had left, Emma began to cry, a thin, reedy sound that echoed in the empty church. Violet bounced her gently, but the infant's cries grew more insistent. She's hungry, Violet explained, embarrassment coloring her cheeks. I should find somewhere to feed her. Adam Xavier looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, in a move that would forever alter the course of Violet's life, he stepped forward and held out his hand. My ranch has a spare room, he said. It's yours until you decide what comes next. Violet stared at his outstretched hand, unable to comprehend what he was offering. Mr. Xavier, I couldn't possibly. The storm won't wait on propriety, Miss Harper, he said. And neither will your daughter's hunger. My housekeeper, Mrs. Donnelly, is there. You'll have all the privacy and respect you deserve. The minister, who had been standing by awkwardly, cleared his throat. Mr. Xavier is right, Miss Harper. You need shelter, at least until arrangements can be made. Violet looked down at Emma, whose tiny face was scrunched in hunger and discomfort. What choice did she have? Her daughter needed food, warmth, and safety. Her pride was a luxury she could no longer afford. Thank you, she said finally, taking Adam's hand. We accept your kindness. Adam nodded once, then removed his coat and draped it over her shoulders. My wagon is outside, he said. We should hurry before the rain starts. As they stepped out of the church into the blustery spring day, Violet felt the weight of stares from townsfolk who had lingered to witness her humiliation. Adam seemed not to notice, or perhaps not to care, as he helped her into the wagon with a gentle steadiness that belied his strength. The journey to Silverhorn Ranch passed in relative silence, broken only by Emma's occasional whimpers and the distant rumbles of thunder. The wagon jolted over the rutted road, and Adam adjusted their pace to minimize the discomfort for mother and child. Why are you doing this? Violet finally asked as the first drops of rain began to fall. You hardly know me. Adam kept his eyes on the road ahead, his hands steady on the reins. My mother was left alone with a child once, he said simply. No one helped her. The words hung between them, and Violet didn't press for more. There was a depth of understanding in his brief explanation that spoke volumes about the man beside her. As they crested a hill, Silverhorn Ranch came into view, a sturdy main house flanked by a barn, corral, and bunkhouse. It wasn't grand, but it was well-maintained, a testament to its owner's care and diligence. Home, Adam said, the single word carrying a weight of meaning that Violet couldn't fully decipher. What she didn't know then, as the rain began to fall in earnest and they raced toward the shelter of his ranch, was that the simple word would come to mean something entirely different to her in the months ahead. That this unexpected act of kindness from a taciturn rancher would challenge everything she thought she knew about survival in the West, and about her own heart's capacity to heal and hope again. Mrs. Donnelly, a stout woman in her 60s with iron-gray hair and kind eyes, welcomed them at the door with an efficiency that brooked no argument. So this is the little one, she said, peering at Emma with obvious approval, and in need of a feeding, by the sounds of it. Come along, Miss Harper, I've prepared the east room for you. Plenty of privacy there. Adam disappeared to tend to the horses, while Mrs. Donnelly ushered Violet into a clean, simply furnished bedroom. A fire already burned in the small hearth, taking the chill from the air. Mr. Xavier sent word ahead, Mrs. Donnelly explained, answering Violet's unspoken question. Said you'd need a proper place to rest. I brought up some hot water and towels. There's a rocking chair by the window for feeding the babe. Overwhelmed by the thoughtfulness, Violet felt tears threatening again. Thank you, she managed. I don't know how I'll repay such kindness. Mrs. Donnelly waved away her words. There's no debt in common decency, miss. Now, you settle yourself and that little one. I'll bring up some tea and something light to eat once you've had a chance to tend to her. Left alone, Violet sat in the rocking chair and nursed Emma, staring out at the rain-swept landscape. The storm that had threatened all morning now raged in full force, but inside these walls, she and Emma were safe and warm. The irony wasn't lost on her. She had expected to find shelter in a husband's home today, not the ranch of a man she barely knew. A knock at the door sometime later announced Mrs. Donnelly's return with a tray of tea, bread, and a bowl of hearty stew. After ensuring Violet had everything she needed, the housekeeper departed with a promise to check in later. Violet ate slowly, savoring the first hot meal she'd had in days. The events of the morning felt surreal now. The empty church, Thomas's absence, the sudden appearance of Adam Xavier. She wondered what tomorrow would bring, how she would rebuild her life from this point. The rain continued well into the evening, drumming on the roof and windows, a soothing rhythm that eventually lulled both Violet and Emma to sleep. She woke the next morning to sunshine streaming through the curtains and the smell of coffee and bacon wafting up from below. Emma stirred beside her in the small crib Mrs. Donnelly had somehow produced the previous evening. After dressing in yesterday's clothes and tending to Emma, Violet made her way downstairs, following the scent of breakfast to a warm kitchen where Mrs. Donnelly was bustling about. "Good morning, miss. Sleep well, did you?" the older woman asked, already pouring a cup of coffee. "Better than I expected," Violet admitted. "Is Mr. Xavier about? I'd like to thank him and discuss what happens next." "He's been up since dawn, checking fences after the storm," Mrs. Donnelly said. "He'll be in shortly for breakfast. Sit yourself down and have some food. You're feeding too, remember." Violet had just finished a plate of eggs and bacon when Adam entered, removing his hat and hanging it by the door. Their eyes met across the kitchen, and he nodded in greeting. "Miss Harper," he said, "you look rested." "Thanks to your hospitality," she replied. "Mr. Xavier, I can't express my gratitude enough, but I need to figure out what to do now. I have some savings, not much, but perhaps enough to—" "There's no rush," he interrupted, taking a seat at the table as Mrs. Donnelly placed a heaping plate before him. "Winter's behind us, but the spring can be unpredictable. You're welcome to stay until you have a solid plan." "I couldn't impose. It's not an imposition," he said firmly. "This house has stood half empty for too long." Mrs. Donnelly made a sound of agreement. "That it has, and it does my old heart good to have a young one around again." She smiled at Emma, who was contentedly sleeping in Violet's arms. "At least let me earn my keep," Violet insisted. "I can cook, clean, mend. Mrs. Donnelly handles the house," Adam said. "But if you're set on contributing, the accounts need organizing." Previous foreman tried, but numbers weren't his strong suit. Violet perked up at this. Before moving west, she'd received more education than most young women, including training in bookkeeping from her merchant uncle. "I could certainly help with that," she said. Adam nodded, something like approval flashing in his eyes. Then it settled. "You'll stay and help with the books. We can revisit the arrangement in a few weeks." And so Violet Harper and her daughter found themselves temporary residents of Silverhorn Ranch. What had begun as an emergency shelter from a storm evolved into something neither she nor Adam could have anticipated. The first week passed in a blur of adjustment. Violet established a routine around Emma's needs while gradually taking over the ranch's account books, which were indeed in disarray. Adam provided a small desk in the corner of his study where she could work during Emma's naps, and Violet found herself unexpectedly content in the quiet companionship as Adam reviewed correspondence or planned ranch operations at his own larger desk. They rarely spoke during these sessions, but the silence wasn't uncomfortable. Occasionally, Adam would ask her opinion on a supply order or the timing of a cattle sale, and Violet would find herself drawn into discussions about the business of ranching. "You have a good head for this," he remarked one afternoon after she'd identified a pattern of feed cost increases that corresponded with a particular supplier. "Numbers tell stories if you know how to read them," she replied, surprised by the pride that warmed her at his acknowledgement. As April turned to May, Violet began to notice subtle changes in their interactions. Adam, initially so reserved, would sometimes linger at the breakfast table to tell her about a new calf or ask about Emma's development. He began bringing her wildflowers he'd found while riding the range, claiming offhandedly that Mrs. Donnelly had mentioned she liked fresh blooms in her room. For her part, Violet found herself watching for his return each evening, taking special care with dinner when she knew he'd had a long day, and learning which of his rare smiles meant amusement and which meant approval. Emma, growing stronger each day, seemed to thrive in the ranch environment. At 2 months old, she was beginning to show a personality, alert, curious, and surprisingly calm. To Violet's astonishment, the typically stoic Adam would sometimes speak softly to the infant when he thought Violet wasn't looking, grave one-sided conversations about cattle breeds or weather patterns that nonetheless seemed to fascinate Emma. One evening in late May, as twilight settled over the land, Violet sat on the porch rocking Emma. Adam emerged from the barn and approached, his tall figure silhouetted against the sunset. "She looks like you," he said, nodding toward Emma as he took the chair beside Violet. "Everyone says so," Violet agreed. "Though she has her father's chin, I think." Adam was quiet for a moment. "Have you heard from him?" Violet shook her head. "No, and I don't expect to. Thomas wasn't ready for responsibility, never mind a child." "His loss," Adam said simply. The words hung between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. Violet looked at him, really looked at him, and found Adam watching her with an intensity that made her heart quicken. "Most would say I'm the one who lost," she said carefully. "A woman without a husband, with a child born outside marriage. Most people are fools," Adam interrupted. "You're strong, capable, and a good mother. Any man would be fortunate to have you in his life." Before Violet could respond, a rider appeared at the edge of the property, approaching fast. Adam stood, instantly alert. "Stay here," he said, moving toward the steps as the rider drew closer. The man reined in his horse sharply, dust billowing around him. "Xavier," he called, "you've got trouble coming." It was Frank Miller, owner of the neighboring ranch, and one of the few people Adam considered a friend. "What kind of trouble?" Adam asked, striding to meet him. "Thomas Weatherby's back in town," Frank said, glancing at Violet. "And he's not alone. Brought his brother and 2 cousins from back east. They're asking questions about Miss Harper's whereabouts." Violet felt the blood drain from her face. Thomas had never mentioned a brother, much less cousins. What could they want with her now? "Are they making threats?" Adam asked, his voice dangerously calm. "Not outright," Frank replied. "But they're armed and been drinking at the saloon since noon. Overheard them talking about family honor and settling accounts." Adam's expression hardened. "Appreciate the warning, Frank. We'll be ready if they decide to ride out this way." After Frank departed with promises to send his foreman and a couple of hands to help if needed, Adam returned to Violet on the porch. "We should get inside," he said, already scanning the horizon. "If they come, it will likely be after dark." Violet clutched Emma closer. What could they possibly want? "Thomas left me. He made his choice." "Men like that don't think in terms of choices," Adam said grimly. "They think in terms of possession. You were Thomas's in their eyes, and now you're here, with me." "But we're not," Violet began, then stopped, suddenly aware of how their situation might appear to outsiders. A young, unmarried mother living at a bachelor's ranch for nearly 2 months, regardless of Mrs. Donnelly's presence, gossip would have flourished. "It doesn't matter what is or isn't true," Adam said, understanding her unfinished thought. "What matters is keeping you and Emma safe." They spent a tense evening indoors, Adam cleaning his rifle at the kitchen table, while Mrs. Donnelly fussed over supper that no one had the appetite to eat. Violet put Emma to bed early, then returned downstairs, unable to rest while threat loomed. "You should try to sleep," Adam told her. "I'll keep watch." "I couldn't possibly," she replied, taking a seat across from him. After a moment's hesitation, she asked, "Have you ever used that? Against a person, I mean." Adam's hand stilled on the rifle. "Once," he said, "when I first claimed this land. A group of men tried to run me off, said a boy couldn't hold property this valuable. What happened? I wounded one. The others decided the land wasn't worth dying for." His eyes met hers. "I don't want bloodshed on my property, Violet, but I will protect what's mine." The use of her given name, the first time he'd said it, wasn't lost on her. Nor was the inclusion of her and Emma in what he considered his to protect. The night passed without incident, but the threat cast a shadow over the following days. Adam increased patrols of the property, and the ranch hands took turns standing guard. Violet kept Emma close, jumping at unexpected sounds and watching the road with anxious eyes. A week later, when no confrontation had materialized, Adam suggested they ride into town for supplies. "We can't hide forever," he said, "and we need to know what we're facing." Mrs. Donnelly agreed to watch Emma, and Violet found herself in the wagon beside Adam, heading towards Sterling Creek for the first time since her aborted wedding. She wore one of the new dresses she'd sewn from fabric Adam had ordered, her hair neatly braided and pinned beneath a modest bonnet. "You look beautiful," Adam said unexpectedly as they approached town. Violet blushed, uncertain how to respond to the compliment from this man who had become so important to her life, yet remained in many ways a mystery. "Thank you," she said simply. Sterling Creek was buzzing with mid-morning activity, wagons loading supplies, children playing near the schoolhouse, women gossiping outside the general store. Conversations faltered as Adam helped Violet down from the wagon, hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. "Everyone's staring," Violet whispered, acutely aware of the curious and sometimes hostile gazes directed their way. "Let them," Adam replied, offering his arm. "Hold your head high. You've done nothing to be ashamed of." They entered the general store together, where the proprietor, Mr. Jenkins, greeted them with cautious politeness. "Miss Harper, Mr. Xavier. What can I help you with today?" Adam handed over a supply list while Violet examined fabric for baby clothes. She was selecting buttons when the store door opened, and a hush fell over the other customers. Thomas Weatherby stood in the doorway, flanked by a taller man who bore a striking resemblance to him. Presumably the brother Frank had mentioned. Thomas looked much as she remembered, handsome in a polished way, with carefully groomed hair and fashionable clothes. What she'd once found charming now seemed merely superficial. "Well," Thomas drawled, "if it isn't my runaway bride." Violet stiffened, but before she could respond, Adam was beside her, his presence solid and reassuring. "Weatherby," Adam acknowledged coldly. "Heard you left town in a hurry." Thomas's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Family business back east. All sorted now." His gaze shifted to Violet. "I've come to make things right, Violet. To take you and my child home." The audacity of his claim left Violet momentarily speechless. This man had abandoned her at the altar, fled town without a word, and now expected her to simply go with him? "Emma and I have a home," she said finally, her voice steadier than she felt. "And you forfeited any right to call yourself her father when you left." Thomas's brother stepped forward, his expression darkening. "Now see here, woman. My brother's come back to do the honorable thing, despite your indiscretions." He cast a meaningful glance at Adam. "The only indiscretion I see," Adam said evenly, "is a man who abandons his responsibilities, then returns expecting a welcome." Thomas's face flushed with anger. "This isn't your concern, Xavier. This is between me and my fiancé." "Former fiancé," Violet corrected. "And it is his concern, as I'm under his protection now." "Protection?" Thomas sneered. "Is that what they're calling it these days? The whole town knows you've been living at his ranch since the day I left." "How long did you wait before sharing his bed, Violet? A day? A week?" The accusation hung in the air, ugly and deliberate. Violet felt the weight of judgment from everyone in the store, saw the smug certainty in Thomas's eyes that he had publicly shamed her. Adam moved so quickly that no one had time to react. One moment he stood beside Violet, the next he had Thomas by the collar, pushed against the store counter. "Apologize to the lady," he said, his voice low and dangerous. Thomas's brother reached for his gun, but Mr. Jenkins raised a shotgun from behind the counter. "No firearms in my store, gentlemen," he warned. "Take it outside if you must, but I'll have no bloodshed among my merchandise." Adam released Thomas with a slight shove. "You heard Mr. Jenkins. Outside, if you want to continue this conversation." "This isn't over, Xavier," Thomas spat, straightening his collar. "That's my child, and I have rights." "Rights you gave up when you ran," Adam replied. "Now, I suggest you leave town again, this time for good. There's nothing for you here." Thomas looked at Violet, his expression calculating. "We'll see about that. Come on, Richard." He nodded to his brother, and they departed with a final menacing glare. The store remained silent for several long moments after their departure. Then Mr. Jenkins cleared his throat. "Your supplies will be ready in about an hour, Mr. Xavier," he said, as if nothing unusual had occurred. "Perhaps you and Miss Harper would like to get some lunch at the hotel in the meantime?" Adam looked at Violet, concern evident in his eyes. "Are you all right?" She nodded, though her hands trembled slightly. "Yes. I didn't expect to face him so soon." They left the store and crossed to the hotel dining room, where Adam insisted on a table by the window where they could see anyone approaching. Once they were seated with coffee before them, Violet finally voiced the fear that had taken root with Thomas's appearance. What if he tries to take Emma? Legally, he could claim rights as her father. Adam considered this, his expression grave. He could try, but he abandoned you both publicly. Any judge would take that into consideration. But an unmarried mother. Violet's voice caught. The court might decide Emma would be better with her father and his family, regardless of his character. Then we make sure that can't happen, Adam said, reaching across the table to take her hand. Violet, there's something I've been wanting to ask you. His eyes held hers with such intensity that she forgot to breathe. Yes. These past weeks, having you and Emma at the ranch, it's changed everything. You've brought life back to a place that was just shelter before. Adam's thumb traced circles on her palm, sending shivers up her arm. I know it hasn't been long, and you're still healing from what Thomas did, but I've come to care for you. Both of you. Violet's heart thundered in her chest. Adam, what are you saying? I'm saying that I'd be honored if you would consider becoming my wife, he said, the words simple but heartfelt. Not just to protect you from Thomas, though that's part of it, but because I can't imagine my life without you now. The proposal hung between them, unexpected yet somehow inevitable. Violet thought of the past weeks, the quiet moments in his study, the way he held Emma with such care, the sense of peace she'd found at Silverhorn Ranch. This isn't just gratitude talking, she said finally, needing him to understand. When Thomas left me, I thought I'd never trust anyone again. I believed that love was a luxury the frontier didn't allow, especially for a woman alone. But you've shown me differently. You've shown me that strength can exist alongside tenderness, that a real man stands by those who need him. Adam's expression softened, hope kindling in his eyes. Is that a yes? Violet smiled, truly smiled for the first time in months. Yes, Adam Xavier. I would be proud to be your wife. The relief and joy that transformed his normally serious features made him look younger, almost boyish. He raised her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. We'll see the minister this afternoon, he said. The sooner we're legally bound, the safer you and Emma will be. Today? Violet asked, surprised by the urgency. What will people think? That a man is fortunate enough to have won the heart of the most courageous woman in the territory, Adam replied. Besides, it's not as if we're strangers. We've been living under the same roof for 2 months. Violet laughed despite herself. When you put it that way, perhaps we've been scandalously slow about making it official. Their lunch was interrupted by the arrival of Richard Weatherby, who entered the hotel dining room alone and approached their table with determined strides. Xavier, he acknowledged stiffly. Miss Harper, I've come to make a proposition. Adam's posture tensed, but his voice remained level. We're listening. Richard glanced around, then lowered his voice. Thomas is my younger brother, and I've spent most of my life cleaning up his messes. I had no idea he'd abandoned a pregnant woman until I arrived in town last week. I want to make this right, but not in the way Thomas envisions. Violet exchanged a wary look with Adam. What are you proposing? My brother has no interest in being a father, Richard said bluntly. He wants the child because he thinks it will restore his reputation. But a child deserves better than that. He withdrew an envelope from his coat. This contains $500, enough to give your daughter a good start in life. In exchange, I ask only that you sign a paper releasing Thomas from all paternal obligations. Adam's hand tightened around Violet's. Miss Harper doesn't need your money, he said coldly. Perhaps not, Richard conceded, looking between them. But the legal protection might be valuable. This document, properly witnessed, would prevent Thomas from making future claims on the child. Violet considered the offer. The money meant nothing to her. She wouldn't sell her daughter's birthright for any sum. But the legal protection, that had value, especially given Thomas's erratic behavior. I'll sign the release, she said finally. But keep your money, Mr. Weatherby. Emma and I want nothing from your family except to be left in peace. Richard looked surprised, then relieved. Very well. The papers are with the town lawyer, Mr. Holloway. If you're agreeable, we could settle this matter this afternoon. We'll meet you at his office at 3 o'clock, Adam said, after we've seen the minister. Understanding dawned in Richard's eyes. I see. Congratulations would appear to be in order. After Richard departed, Violet and Adam finished their meal in contemplative silence. The day had taken unexpected turns, but she felt strangely at peace with the path ahead. They saw the minister first, arranging a simple ceremony for 5 o'clock that afternoon. The older man seemed unsurprised by their decision, perhaps having guessed at the growing connection between them during his pastoral visits to the ranch. Next came the lawyer's office, where Violet signed papers relinquishing any claim on the Weatherby family in exchange for their similar renunciation of rights to Emma. Richard signed on his brother's behalf as legal proxy, a status confirmed by documents from their family lawyer back east. "Thomas won't be pleased," Richard remarked as they concluded the business. "But he'll abide by it. Our father was very clear about the consequences should Thomas create further scandal." With legal matters settled, Adam and Violet returned to the ranch to prepare for their wedding. Mrs. Donnelly, initially shocked by the sudden development, quickly embraced the plan with characteristic efficiency. "About time, if you ask me," she said, already planning the wedding supper. "That girl needs a proper father, and you two have been dancing around your feelings for weeks." The ceremony itself was small and dignified, just the couple, Emma in Mrs. Donnelly's arms, and a few ranch hands as witnesses. Violet wore her best dress, freshly pressed, with wildflowers in her hair that Adam had picked himself that morning. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Adam's kiss was gentle but thorough, a promise of deeper intimacy to come. Violet found herself blushing under the approving gazes of their small audience, yet filled with a contentment she had never expected to find again. That night, after Emma was settled in her crib and the celebration dinner concluded, Violet waited nervously in what would now be their shared bedroom. Adam entered quietly, his tall frame silhouetted in the doorway. "If you need more time," he began, "I would understand. This has all happened very quickly," and Violet crossed the room to him, placing her fingers against his lips. "I don't need more time," she said softly. "I need you." Their first night together as husband and wife was a revelation. Adam's tenderness, his patient attentiveness to her pleasure, the whispered words of admiration and desire. In his arms, Violet found healing from past wounds and a passion she hadn't known herself capable of feeling. "I never thought I'd find this," she confessed in the quiet aftermath, her head resting on his chest. "After Thomas, I believe the frontier was too harsh for real love to survive." Adam's fingers traced patterns on her bare shoulder. "The frontier doesn't destroy love, Violet. It tests it, reveals what's genuine." He pressed a kiss to her forehead. "What we have is real, forged in difficulty, not in spite of it." Summer turned to autumn, and Violet's place at Silverhorn Ranch transformed from temporary shelter to permanent home. Emma thrived, growing sturdy and strong, beginning to crawl and explore the world around her with curious determination. Adam legally adopted Emma when she was 6 months old, a process made simpler by the papers Richard Weatherby had arranged. The day they returned from the county seat with the official documents, Adam spent hours building a special cradle for the child who now legally bore his name. "She'll outgrow it soon," Violet observed, watching him sand the edges to a silky smoothness. "Then I'll build her a proper bed," Adam replied. "And when she's older, bookshelves for the stories you'll teach her to read." He looked up, a rare full smile lighting his features. "This is just the beginning, Violet. Everything I build now is for the future, our future, together." In October, when golden light bathed the land and the aspens turned to flame on the mountainsides, Violet shared news that completed their family circle. Another child would join them in the spring. Adam's reaction, stunned joy followed by tender concern for her well-being, only confirmed what she already knew, that in this man, she had found not just security, but a love powerful enough to thrive in the challenging western landscape. On a crisp November morning, as they stood on the porch watching Emma take tentative steps toward her father's outstretched hands, Violet reflected on the journey that had brought them here. The church where she had once stood abandoned now seemed a distant memory, replaced by the solid reality of the home and family they had built together. "What are you thinking?" Adam asked, lifting Emma high as she squealed with delight. "That sometimes the worst day of your life can lead to the best," Violet replied, her hand resting on her still flat stomach where their second child grew. "If Thomas hadn't left me at the altar that day, I might never have discovered what real love looks like." Adam set Emma down to practice her wobbling steps, then drew Violet into his embrace. "And I might never have found the courage to claim the family I always wanted." His kiss, tender and certain, carried the promise of years to come, of children growing, seasons changing, and love deepening through all of life's challenges. The frontier that Violet had once feared would deny her happiness had instead become the foundation for a joy far greater than she'd ever imagined possible. In the strong arms of her silent rancher, she had found not just shelter from a storm, but a home for her heart.